guys, it's Kira and welcome to another 24-hour readathon. Now, in my humble opinion, I think today's readathon is a particularly exciting one because today I'm going to be trying to embody my inner Rory Gilmore by basically doing a Rory Gilmore reading list themed 24-hour readathon, and oh my god, that is a mouthful to say. This idea essentially came about because a couple of weeks ago I uploaded a video which was essentially seeing how many of the books from the Rory Gilmore reading list I'd actually read. That is a list of all of the books that ever get mentioned on Gilmore Girls, and it is 339 books long, and of all of those books I had read 48. So after filming that video I realised I have a lot of work to do in order to reach Rory Gilmore levels of reading, and so I figured why not kickstart it with a 24-hour readathon, because they're so much fun and also a great way to push yourself and challenge yourself to read more than you normally would, which is exactly what I need because I clearly have a lot of books left to read. And I'm also so excited because today I'm going to be doing this read along with one of my best friends and also my Rory Gilmore wannabe friend, Carolyn, from the channel Carolyn Marie Reads. We both love Gilmore Girls, love Rory, and just love all things to do with reading. And because we both had recently uploaded videos about the Rory Gilmore reading list and books that Rory had recommended, we figured that it would be a really fun challenge to try and push ourselves to read more of the books on that list because we both really want to get through them all. And so we thought this would be the perfect way to challenge ourselves to do that. So of course Carolyn is based in New York, so we're in different time zones, but I think we are going to Skype at some point and do a little reading session together and chat about the books that we're reading, and I think it's just going to be really lovely to do this little read along with her. But in terms of the books I'm going to be reading, it was quite hard to decide because clearly I had a lot of books to choose from. I'd read only just about 50 and there were almost 350 to choose from, but essentially I've narrowed it down to 6 books altogether, and I'm not naive enough to think that I'm going to read all 6 of these books because some of them are classics and quite big, but I wanted to give myself plenty of choice. So I've gone for books in quite a variety of genres and in a variety of lengths and styles so that I can keep mixing it up, not get too bored or stuck in one style of reading, and also just that I can constantly have something that will suit any mood that I'm in throughout this 24-hour readathon. Now, because I'm not going to end up reading all of those books, I'll just explain each of them to you as and when I go through, but they've all been picked from the Rory Gilmore reading list, and the one that I'm planning to start with is actually one book from this short story collection. So this is Different Seasons by Stephen King, but one of the books on the Rory Gilmore reading list was Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which is a book that I've been wanting to read for ages because I love the Shawshank Redemption film, and also because it's just a short story. It's only 133 pages long, which means that I'll be off to a great start and will have ticked off one book hopefully quite soon into the readathon. So that is what I'm going to be starting with, but I don't think it would be a Rory Gilmore readathon if I didn't start off with food. So in very Rory Gilmore style fashion, I haven't made something myself. I've actually gone to the cafe and got myself a delicious vegan croissant, which I'm so excited about. I'm gonna heat it up so that it's nice and warm and flaky and make some coffee because coffee. And also slightly less Gilmore Girls fashion, I think I'm gonna also make a smoothie just to have some healthy foods in there as well. So I'm going to do that, eat, drink, settle down, get cozy, watch some Gilmore Girls, and then once I've finished eating, I'll check the time and start the 24-hour readathon officially. Okay, so let's see what time it is. It is currently 4:15 in the afternoon, so I've technically been reading for about 3 hours, although I've been half reading and half watching episodes of Gilmore Girls. I started with season 3 because that's my personal favourite season, and I feel like the favourite season of a lot of people who are also on Team Jess, because that is kind of like one of the main things that's going on in season 3. So whenever I want to watch Gilmore Girls without rewatching the entire series and I just want to watch a couple of episodes, I always go straight for season 3. But I've also been reading Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, and I just finished that one, so that is book 1 of the Rory Gilmore readathon done. I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, it's been one that I've wanted to read for a while but just haven't gotten around to, mainly because I just didn't necessarily want to read all 4 books in this little short story collection at the same time, and I kind of forgot that I could just read one and I didn't have to commit to reading all of them. So I'm really glad that I read it, and I have to say now that I think that the movies of Stephen King's books are often a little bit rubbish. However, I would say that the 2 best ones are Shawshank Redemption and Misery, potentially followed by Stand By Me, and I think that the reason for that is because a lot of Stephen King's books are obviously focused on paranormal elements, and when those paranormal books are turned into films, they seem to cut out all of the interesting character development and just focus on the jump scares and exciting horror elements, whereas in these books like Shawshank, like Misery, and like Stand By Me, which is actually in this book as well, and this is called The Body. So those books are all focused just on real people. There's no paranormal element, and so when they get turned into movies, it seems like they're a lot truer to the book and just focus on all of that interesting character development, which is why I think Stephen King's books are so good. And it's always so sad when I've enjoyed one of his books and then watched the film adaptation and found that the film adaptation had kind of just cut out all of the best bits of the book. So I was really glad that this felt just basically like a written version of the film. The only slight difference with this one is that it's obviously a short story, whereas the film is actually quite long, so it definitely like developed on certain elements and fleshed out some of the characters that were more side characters a little bit more and gave them bigger plot lines. But overall, the vibe from the book and the film was very similar, which is great because I really liked the film, so I really liked the book as well. If you're not familiar with Shawshank, I feel like most people are, but essentially it's a book which is set in a Shawshank prison, and we're following the story of this guy called Andy Dufresne, who comes into the prison just at the end of like World War II, so it's like late 1940s, and he's in prison for the murder of his wife and her lover, but he's adamant that he's innocent, and he ends up being in prison for years and years and years, like at least 20 years, and he's just kind of living his life. And although we are getting the story where we're kind of following what happens to Andy, it's being told to us from the perspective of Red, who is another prisoner at Shawshank. He's also in there for murder, and he has been in there for even longer than Andy. The book kind of kicks off because we're getting it from Red's perspective, with him basically saying that he, as Red, is one of the only people in prison who is actually happy to admit what they did. Not happy in the sense of like that he's glad that he did it, but he's willing to admit that he's in there for a reason. And so Andy comes in and he's adamant that he's innocent, and Red at first kind of just views him as another person who's in prison and is just innocent, but then gradually over time they build up this friendship and he starts to actually believe in Andy's innocence. And so we follow them over quite a long period of time, lots of things happen, and it's a really interesting story. I feel like I can't really say too much else without giving away any spoilers, but what I will say is that of course if you've seen the film version, you'll know that Red as a character is played by Morgan Freeman, who just has the most incredible voice. And so reading this book, which is written from Red's perspective, in my mind I was just hearing it all in Morgan Freeman's voice, which was definitely an enjoyable reading experience. It just made the book seem even more impactful. And then another thing which kind of stood out to me for the reason that I've just literally in the last weekend qualified as a yoga teacher, and throughout my yoga teacher training we've studied a lot of yoga philosophy, and when you sort of boil yoga philosophy down to its ultimate aim is that you're aiming to be peaceful and have like balance in the mind and all of that kind of stuff, and it's meant to be, you know, quite difficult to actually achieve that because it's so easy to be influenced by outside sources. And in one section in this book on page 60, so about halfway through this little short story, Red describes Andy as I've told you that he had something most of the other prisoners, myself included, seemed to lack. Call it a sense of equanimity or a feeling of inner peace. Maybe even a constant and unwavering faith that someday the long nightmare would end. he always seemed to have his act together. And I just thought it was really funny that obviously it's a book which is set in a prison, which is really kind of not a very yogic setting, but he's described in a very like balanced and yogi type of way, which is interesting. And Andy is a very interesting character to follow, particularly because we're not following his actual perspective, we're just kind of getting his story but through a filter, which is kind of one of the main things about this, because a lot of the story relies on the sort of prison grapevine and the way that information filters through various people and sort of comes together to make this a very, very subjective story that you don't really know if you can trust. So I've just finished this book. Book 1 is done. I think it is definitely time for another cup of coffee and maybe a little bit of chocolate, and then I'm going to get started on book number 2, which I'll show you when I get back with a drink. Okay, coffee has been made and I've decided that the next book I'm going to be reading for this little Rory Gilmore 24-hour readathon is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is the book which has been on my TBR for a really long time. Earlier today actually I filmed a full collection of all of my classics, like a little tour of my classics collection for a video that'll be going up before this one actually, so I'll link it somewhere for you to go and check it out if you're interested. But this was one of the books that I obviously mentioned, and this is part of the Penguin Deluxe Classics collection, and I have now got a lot of those books. This one was the first one that I've bought and I've still yet to read it, so I feel like now would be a perfect time to get around to reading this one. It is about 350 pages altogether, and I don't know how long it's going to take me to read because this is the first time I've ever done a 24-hour readathon where I've read any classics. I usually just stick to like contemporaries because I find them easier to read, so they're obviously a lot quicker for something like this, but obviously this is a Rory Gilmore readathon and Rory is renowned for loving classics and I love classics as well, so I just thought I'd give it a go and see how far we get, and hopefully it's a really good one. I'm really excited to read it. So I'm gonna go grab some chocolate, obviously, and enjoy this book. So for my birthday, someone got me a little like box of vegan snacks, which is great because I love vegan snacks. And one of the things was this Mandel orange chocolate, which Mandel is almond in German. So I'm really excited to try this one, and it's made of rice milk. So just thought I'd give that a try, why not? Oh, it looks nice. Oh, it smells so orangey. Delicious. My face is too big, it won't focus. There we go. That is so yummy. I feel like orange chocolate is something that people either love or hate, and I love it. So I'm going to enjoy that along with my cup of coffee that I'm going to try not to spill. I think I might pop on another episode of Gilmore Girls as well and get to reading. Hold on just 1 second. So the reason Sense and Sensibility was the first one of the Penguin Deluxe Classics that I bought was because it has such a beautiful cover and I am in love with it. Now, funnily enough, one of the other books, not to give any spoilers, that I'm also planning on reading today if I have time is The Time Traveller's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, and this is a book which I'm really excited to read if I have time. Hopefully I can squeeze them both in. But I literally just opened this book and would you look what's on the inside of the cover. Cover design by none other than Audrey Niffenegger. What a weird coincidence, and this just makes my decision to read both of these books even more perfect now. So I'm gonna get back to reading. Just me again. I'm actually just about to do the Skype call that I mentioned with Carolyn. I think we're both just gonna read together for a while. I'm obviously starting Sense and Sensibility. I'm currently 6 pages in, and Carolyn is reading a poetry collection, so I think we're gonna read together for a little bit and then chat. And yeah, I'll keep you updated. So I just got off my Skype call with Carolyn and it was so lovely. We've been doing a few Skype calls recently actually. We had a buddy reread a few weeks ago of Normal People by Sally Rooney. So we had a couple of Skype calls chatting about how amazing Sally Rooney is basically. And then of course we're both a Rory Gilmoreing our lives today, and so it was really fun to chat about how much we love Gilmore Girls, because I feel like Carolyn is the one and only person I know who loves Gilmore Girls as much as I do. It's obviously a show that is very well loved, but I feel like the way that we love it is just on another level, so it's fun to have someone who shares that passion for it and also secretly, or not so secretly, wants to be Rory Gilmore as much as I do. And then as we were Skyping and just chatting, we got onto the subject of like, basically because we're both reading classics and they're set in such a different time period to the one that we currently live in, and obviously I'm particularly reading a Jane Austen one and it's all about society at that time, and we always think it's so cool reading about these societies that are so different, and it's really fun to imagine what life would have been like if you lived then. But it was really interesting because we were literally on a Skype call, and I'm obviously here in the UK and Carolyn is in like New York in America, and it's just so amazing because reading these books you have to imagine that your entire social circle was purely determined by A, your like economic status, because that kind of determined who you could associate with, and B, your like physical location, because except by pure coincidence you really did only have the opportunity to interact with people who were literally in like your close proximity, because how else would you have met people? And so for example with Carolyn and I being from like 2 completely different countries and living so far apart, if we'd lived at this time, except by pure coincidence and travel, there's no way that we would ever like crossed paths. Whereas with the internet you can like meet people who have like the same interests as you, and you can make these incredible friendships without actually ever meeting. And of course it would be incredible to meet one day, but I just think it's amazing how powerful how powerful the internet is essentially, and how you can have all of these incredible friendships with people all across the world. So that's super cool, and although I love reading classics, it does definitely make me grateful for living in the time that I do live in, just because I just think it's so cool to be able to meet people from all over and have these shared passions and interests with people who you otherwise wouldn't have ever met. And then as well as that quite deep conversation, we were also doing some reading. So I'm of course reading Sense and Sensibility, and I'm now 50 pages in, really enjoying it. This is an Austen novel which I don't really know too much about, to be honest. I haven't really got any major expectations, which I think is quite nice because I'm just going in with a completely open mind. And so far what we have is a recently widowed woman called Mrs. Dashwood and her 3 daughters. We have Eleanor, the oldest daughter, Marianne, the middle daughter, and then Margaret, the youngest. And not to be rude, and this might change, I'm only 50 pages in, but at this point I feel like Margaret is kind of a pointless addition, and I don't know if she's really going to have much to play in the story because she's younger than the other 2 sisters, and of course Jane Austen's novels often surround the theme of courtship and marriage, and Margaret is obviously far too young for that, so I'm not really sure whether she has any purpose essentially. But other than that, I'm really enjoying it. And there was a line which described one of the older female characters, which says, "Mrs. Jennings was a widow. She had only 2 daughters, both of whom she had lived to see respectably married, and she now had therefore nothing to do but to marry all the rest of the world." And I just love that. I feel like she's going to be such a fun character, and I always love those like matchmaking type characters who aren't in it for anything except for trying to like just put people together. Like they don't really have anything to gain from it except their own sort of fun and games, and just like putting people together just to see what happens. So I think this is going to be really, really fun. We are mainly focusing on the two older sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, and sort of their romantic pursuits and how they're quite different from one another. And one is of course Sense and the other is Sensibility. I think Eleanor is Sense and she's quite like reserved and a little bit cooler and a little bit more like self-controlled, whereas Marianne is Sensibility and she is like a little bit more taken away with emotions and romance and wanting everything to be perfect and very like wear your heart on your sleeve type of thing. But I'm really enjoying it, and I just mentioned how much we love Sally Rooney, Carolyn and I, but whilst I was reading this, of course, one of the characters is called Marianne and the main character from Normal People is called Marianne, so we did get onto a discussion about normal people. Like, would it be as if we didn't end up talking about normal people? I really don't think so. And so then Carolyn told me that there is a video which Jack Edwards recently uploaded where he read every single book that Connell had read. So it's kind of like the Connell version of the challenge that Carolyn and I are currently trying to do. So I'm just about to go and make some dinner because it's like 7 p.m. and I need to eat something, and whilst I eat dinner I'm going to watch that video. And that kind of also got me on the topic of the fact that I definitely think that if Rory Gilmore was a real person and Gilmore Girls was set like now, I just think Rory would definitely be at least a book blogger, if not a booktuber. I just feel like that would have definitely been in her path. So rambles over. I'm really looking forward to carrying on with this book after dinner, and I'll of course keep you updated with my thoughts. It was so lovely to Skype with Carolyn, and I also helped her pick her next read, but she is vlogging today as well, so I'll have her vlog linked for you so you can go and check out what she's reading, because we've both gone for very different TBRs, so you can go and see two sides of the Rory Gilmore reading list and see what she picks up too. I am fully using this read along as an excuse to drink way too much coffee, and for this one I decided to just jazz it up with vegan cream and vegan marshmallows and chocolate because, quite frankly, I think it is the Gilmore way. Well, this lighting really does nothing for my under eye circles, but what can you do? It is currently, let's see, just before 10 p.m. and so I thought I'd do one final reading update for this evening because it's Tuesday night, and although I'm going to be staying up and reading more, everyone else in the house is going to bed and probably people need to be up early, so I probably won't be able to do any more speaking until the morning. But I am currently just under 100 pages now into Sense and Sensibility, and I'm still really enjoying this one. I just love Jane Austen's writing style in general, and she just has a way of captivating you in these like social circles of the 19th century and just kind of makes you feel like you're transported there and you're getting to interact with such a wide cast of characters. She always manages to like include so many different characters, and you have like obviously the people that you are predominantly following, your main characters, your protagonists, their family, but then they're also just like so well fleshed out in terms of the inner social circles and the wider social circles, and I just feel like she does such a good job of really like transporting you into it. And I also think it's something that has really aged well. Obviously I can't reference it from a point of like actual experience because I didn't live when this was how society really was. However, I can say that as a modern reader, it really does make you feel like you have been taken into that universe and that sort of style of society, which I really like. I feel like the more Jane Austen I've read, the more I've kind of gotten used to her overall structure, particularly in the sense that the way that she deals with romance. And of course, at this point in the book, we're like not quite halfway in, but we're a bit more established and the characters seem a bit more familiar. And at this point, there's a little bit of drama surrounding one of the major romances of the book. And I feel like if I was reading this and this was my first ever Jane Austen, I would probably be a bit more swept up by this drama. But because I'm reading it as someone who has read now 4 of her books, this is the 5th one I'm reading, I feel like I have a little bit more of an expectation that the person that Jane Austen initially makes you think is going to be the love interest of your protagonist is almost certain not to be. And so at this point where we have this first love interest between one of the sisters, Marianne, and a character called Willoughby, I'm kind of certain that that's kind of just like a curveball and that something else is going to crop up later on. I might be wrong, but that's kind of my expectation, so I feel like I'm slightly less swept up by the emotion of this turmoil because of the fact that I feel like he's more of a like scapegoat and isn't the real like romantic interest. So be interested to see whether that is the case. And like I said, I'm not going to sleep now, I am going to carry on reading, but I just won't be able to update you until the morning. So until then, I'm just going to carry on reading and see how far I get. Good morning, guys. It's currently about 8:30 and to say that I've been struggling this morning would be an understatement. I, as you saw, woke up like just after about 5 a.m. and it's now 8:30 and I've been reading at snail's pace, literally so slowly because I just keep drifting off, and it is no reflection on this book whatsoever because I'm really enjoying it, but for some reason I just keep drifting off and I just have absolutely no energy whatsoever. I usually struggle with 24-hour readathons in the evening, but then when I wake up after a few hours sleep, I'm usually fine, but this morning I just seem to have no energy. It is a very grey day outside, so I feel like maybe the weather is having a bit of a pathetic fallacy effect on my life and it's just making me feel very sleepy and tired, but I am enjoying the book. I'm currently on page 250, which means I've got 100 pages left until the end, and it's definitely an enjoyable read. I don't think it's quite as good, in my opinion, as Emma, which, like I've already mentioned, is my favourite Jane Austen novel, but I'm definitely enjoying it. It's a fun one and I really don't know where it's going to go. And just as I was feeling really sleepy a little while ago, Jane Austen she must have known and she just hit me with something that was very unexpected. And so I feel like I have no idea where the book is really going to go or who our 2 main characters are going to end up with, because at this point it's just so open and I don't know what we're going to end up with. There's one person who is kind of like a potential suitor, but I don't know who he's going to end up with, and then if he ends up with one of the 2 main characters, who the other one will end up with. So it's all very open and very interesting, so I'm looking forward to finding out what's going on. My one major critique though of what's gone on so far is more just a structural thing, that I feel like it does read slightly clunky, in the sense that, as I've mentioned, this is a book which is focusing on 2 sisters. We have Eleanor and Marianne, and they're very different from one another, but essentially it's just about the potential romantic futures of both of these sisters. However, it seems like Jane Austen can only write about one of the romances at one time, and so the characters are very conveniently moved around in order to make in order to sort of facilitate that. And so one moment you'll have two characters together who are potentially connected romantically, and then all of a sudden something will happen to separate those characters, and then as if by magic the romantic interest of the other sister will turn up, and then something will happen that will make them separate, and then the other one comes back, and it's just very, very convenient. And that's kind of the one thing that kind of makes it read as if it is like a fictional story rather than something that you can believe is real, because of the fact that it's just so convenient. But it's just a minor critique. It's not really affecting my enjoyment of the story. It's just something that I've noticed, because it is literally like one page, one romantic interest leaves, and then the next page the other sister's romantic interest turns up, and it's just like slightly too convenient for my liking. But aside from that, I am really enjoying it. I was also thinking about, of course, the sisters are Sense and Sensibility, and which one I feel like I like the most. And personally, I feel like I like Marianne the most, particularly because there was a passage where they were travelling down to London, and Marianne is just so obsessed with like the picturesque and admiring beauty, and she's like so taken away by all of these things. And so she is thinking about their old family home, and particularly this family home in autumn time. And then she's basically saying, "With what transporting sensations have I formerly seen them fall? How I've delighted as I walk to see them driven in showers about me by the wind. What feelings have they, the season, the air altogether inspired? Now there is no one to regard them. They are seen only as a nuisance, swept hastily off and driven as much as possible from the sight." Talking about autumn leaves falling down, and then Eleanor replies, "It is not everyone who has your passion for dead leaves." And as someone who is a big lover of autumn and is taken away by the beauty of autumn leaves falling, I very much felt connected to Marianne in that sentence, and I felt a bit called out by Eleanor, because I just think that they're beautiful and we should have appreciation for those things in nature. But overall, I like both the sisters, to be perfectly honest, and I do like the way that they kind of counterbalance one another out. And I also feel like having this little chat has managed to like reinvigorate me, which is great. So I'm gonna go make a coffee number 5 or 6 I think I'm on right now, and get on with some more reading, of course. Okay, so today is definitely a slow and steady type of reading day, but it is now nearly 10:15 and I just finished up reading Sense and Sensibility, which was lovely. I'm so glad that I finally read this because it's been on my shelves for the longest time and it was just incredible. I don't really feel like I've got much else to say in terms of like critical thoughts on it. Like I said at the beginning, I feel like the third sister is a pointless addition to the book and could have been completely omitted. The book in general is like a little bit predictable in the sense of just like, you know, it's a Jane Austen book. When you've read a few, you can kind of sort of guess what direction they're going in, but it doesn't make it any less enjoyable to read because she has this formula where you've got like the initial idea, then you've got the curveball, you've got like lots of drama and humour sprinkled in, you've got antagonistic characters and like comedy ones, and then of course you get to the conclusion. And the thing about Jane Austen which makes it so lovely to read is that every single time you pick up one of her books, you know that no matter what drama is sprinkled into the middle of the book, it's always going to end well. And so it's a really nice sort of book to pick up when you just want to read something that's uplifting and happy. So really enjoyed it, and like I said earlier, it was slightly like convenient and clunky in the way that the two sisters' romances were kind of dealt with and kind of like kept swapping out for one another, but it didn't really affect my enjoyment of the book. It was just something that I noticed. So really enjoyed it, and like I said, it's 10:15, so I now have 3 hours left of the readathon until 1:15 when I'm done. And as much as I would love to say that I'm about to pick up The Time Traveller's Wife, particularly given the fact that the author of this book designed the cover of this book, I really wanted to read this one, but my pace on Sense and Sensibility was so slow, and this book has pretty small text and has 518 pages. So sadly, I don't think this is going to be a book that I'm going to be able to finish in the next 3 hours. So instead, in order to try and finish 3 books in this readathon, I'm going to be picking up another one from the Rory Gilmore reading list, which is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Now this is a book which is technically, it's got a duology, it's got Alice in Wonderland and also Alice Through the Looking Glass. So Alice in Wonderland only lasts, let's see, only takes up 110 pages of this book, and then Looking Glass takes up about the same. So I'm going to read Alice in Wonderland first. If I have time, I'll do Alice Through the Looking Glass as well, but I think technically the only one that is on the Rory Gilmore reading list is just Alice in Wonderland. So that's the plan, and I think I'm also gonna get dressed because as comfortable as pyjamas are and as lovely as reading in bed is, I feel like I'll feel a lot more productive and energetic if I actually get dressed, and also maybe get a little bit of a change of scenery and go and read somewhere else. So that's the plan, and I may or may not end up having another cup of coffee as well. Gotta get that energy. There's an illustration in this book which is rather terrifying after Alice has drunk and eaten the thing to make her grow. I don't know how I feel about that neck. Okay, so we're not doing too badly for time on this one. It is now 11:42, which means I've got an hour and a half left, I think. And I just finished up reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, so I do still need to read obviously Alice Through the Looking Glass, but I'm about halfway through this book now. Like I said, total book is just over 200 pages and I've just read 116, and it was definitely an interesting reading experience. Obviously it's a very like bizarre and strange book, and I guess Alice says it herself the best when she says curiouser and curiouser, because that is really just like what sums up the entire reading experience. And I also think it's a perfect book to be reading in a Gilmore Girls themed 24-hour readathon, because whilst for the most part Rory and Lorelai make sense, they do have a tendency, especially Lorelai, to descend into the depths of absolute bizarreness and just complete weirdness at times, and there's definitely a little bit of crossover, particularly because Lorelai and Rory speak so fast. I feel like they definitely have some slightly strange Alice in Wonderland vibes, which I like. So yeah, I don't really have anything critical to say as such. It's just a fun little reading experience because it feels like you're reading a riddle the entire time. And also I think Lewis Carroll is obviously very clever in the sense that he has written in so many different formats. Like there definitely are riddles, there's different like shapes that the way that text is used. Like there's one where a mouse is telling a tale, but the tale is told in the shape of a tail. Let me see if I can find it. I felt like it was quite clever. So there's that, there's bits of poetry, there's all kinds of things that I just think are very fun. Let's see. Yeah. The mouse is telling a tale and it's shaped like the mouse's tail, and I just think obviously it's a children's book, and I think it's very clever to write in such a like dynamic way because it really does keep you interested and keeps that depth of the mystery, because you never know what to expect on the next page. So gonna go make a coffee, probably my final coffee of the 24-hour readathon, and I figure I might as well go out on a bang, so I'm going to make a little bit of a fancier one. So I have a milk frother, and I usually just put in my oat milk into there and then make a coffee, but instead of just putting the oat milk in, I'm going to put the oat milk and also maple syrup, and then I'm going to use some vanilla flavoured coffee and make like a mapley, vanilla-y cappuccino. So doing that, reading the book, catch up with you in a bit. Okay, so it is 1:15 on Wednesday the 1st of July and my Rory Gilmore 24-hour readathon is officially over. So as you just saw, I finished Alice Through the Looking Glass at about 1:10 and so I had about 5 minutes to make a very quick start on The Time Traveller's Wife. I'm only like 10 pages in, but Alice Through the Looking Glass, surprisingly, I did not enjoy very much. I quite enjoyed Alice's Adventures in Wonderland because that felt fun, whimsical, dreamlike, and like you had kind of tumbled down the rabbit hole along with Alice. Whereas there was just something about Through the Looking Glass that just didn't have that same sort of bizarre and just like all-encompassing vibe that I got from the first book in the story. So not really sure why that was, or if anyone else has a similar experience where they really like Alice in Wonderland but then just weren't that bothered on Through the Looking Glass. But yeah, and then the Time Traveller's Wife, like I said, just started. It's a very interesting concept about a woman who is married to a time traveller, but like it's not like a time traveller in the sense of like Doctor Who type person, because Henry, the time traveller, like disappears and is transported completely like against his own will. And so I'm really interested to see where this one goes, and I'm definitely going to continue on with this one, obviously just not within the context of this 24-hour readathon because it's done. But I am going to make myself one more Luke's Diner inspired lunch. I'm going to make myself some salted caramel vegan French toast and sit down and watch an episode of Gilmore Girls whilst I eat, and then I'll wrap up my thoughts on all the books that I've read in the last 24 hours. But yeah, lunchtime. Okay, so French toast has been demolished and it was so good. I make that one using a vegan salted caramel protein powder, and I mix that with some oat milk just to make the base of the French toast mixture. Then you just soak the bread in it, fry it up, and then I topped it off with my favourite vegan vanilla Greek style yogurt, some blueberries, strawberries, and obviously maple syrup, duh. And it was so good, one of my absolute favourite recipes at the moment. And then I also watched probably one of the tensest episodes of Gilmore Girls that exists. Maybe not quite as tense as some of the ones where Rory and Lorelai fight, but it's up there because it was the 24-hour like dance marathon one, and it is such a tense and emotional episode, and it kind of got me thinking about what my favourite episodes are, because I obviously love ones with Rory and Jess together because Team Jess obviously, but I actually think some of my favourite ones are the ones in the much later seasons where Jess comes back into Rory's life sort of a little bit, just because I feel like he's grown and become a much better person by that point. And so although they're not romantically together anymore, it's what I love most about their connection is that they both genuinely want the best for each other, and I just think it's so lovely. So those are probably some of my favourite episodes, but let me know what your favourite episode of Gilmore Girls is if you've got one, because it's so hard to choose because they're all so good. But I digress. I'm ready to wrap up about all the books that I picked up today, whilst I was trying to be a little bit more like Rory Gilmore. So, in total, I read 735 pages over the last 24 hours, which I'm pretty pleased with. That is slightly lower than my usual 24-hour readathon totals, which usually end up being in the like early to mid 1,000 pages sort of range. However, I did anticipate that these books would take me a little bit longer to get through. In particular, the Jane Austen, I had a feeling would take me slightly longer to get through just because it's a classic and they are written obviously in a slightly denser way that isn't quite as easy to fly through as say like a contemporary romance. And in other 24-hour readathons I have gone for more contemporary style books because I find them really easy to read, which is fine. So in this one I was obviously reading like Rory, and I didn't really mind it taking slightly longer because the aim was just to read the books from that list, and I definitely feel like I succeeded. So I of course kicked off the readathon with Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which is obviously just one segment of this book, and it was 132 pages. This was a 4-star read for me and I really, really enjoyed it. It was really interesting and the first short story I've read by Stephen King, and I really, really liked it. It was very to the point and it was interesting to compare to the film, which is obviously quite long and has taken a lot of the points from the book, or the short story rather, and made them a lot more developed. But this one kind of just gave you the information that you really needed, particularly focusing on Andy and not really anyone else. And I quite liked the way that it kind of relied on that prison grapevine of information filtering down through various members of the prison congregation, if you can call them that, and then through Red and finally to you as a reader. And so it just had a really interesting style to it and I really, really enjoyed it. However, I gave it 4 stars just because I guess there were certain bits where I enjoyed how they developed the characters in the film and made them a little bit more fleshed out, and so would have been interesting to maybe see a little bit more development of some of the other characters, but on the whole I really, really enjoyed it. And then we had the wonderful Sense and Sensibility, which came in at 353 pages, and I loved this one. This one is somewhere between a 4.5 and a 5-star read for me. I absolutely loved it and I'm just such a big fan of Jane Austen. I have slowly grown to really, really appreciate her works over the years. The first one of her books that I read was Northanger Abbey and I liked it, but I didn't find myself becoming like completely obsessed with her works. And the same kind of went for Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. And then earlier this year I read Emma and absolutely fell in love with it, and I feel like that's kind of transformed my view on Jane Austen as an author and has really made me appreciate it. And I now really want to go back and read all of the works again, and also read Mansfield Park, which is the one that I still need to read. But all in all, this one was fabulous. It was really fun to see that comparison of two sisters who have such a close bond but are also so different from one another, and follow their sort of development and journeys. But like I said, there was just some slight issues in my mind of how it seemed just like a little bit too novel structured, if that makes sense, and just kind of lacked the realism because of the way that she kind of switched between focusing on Eleanor and then focusing on Marianne and not really being able to focus on them both in conjunction. But I still loved it. The reason I'm going for 4.5/5 stars rather than just a solid 5-star is just because of that slight critique, and just the fact that when I read Emma I was obsessed and that was like undoubtedly a 5-star read for me, whereas with this one I liked it but I didn't find myself being quite as enamoured by the characters. But overall, absolutely loved it, and I think this was my favourite read of this 24-hour readathon. I then took on the 2 Alice stories, Alice in Wonderland, or Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Alice Through the Looking Glass, and this book came to a total of 240 pages. And like I said earlier, I actually really, really liked Alice's Adventures in Wonderland because I enjoyed how bizarre and strange and dreamlike it was, but I just didn't get that same experience from Through the Looking Glass. So I've rated Alice's Adventures in Wonderland as 4 stars, but Through the Looking Glass is more like 2. I just didn't really like that one as much. And then I also read 10 pages of The Time Traveller's Wife, which seems interesting so far, but of course is not anywhere near enough to give any real cohesive thoughts on this book. But that brings this Rory Gilmore 24-hour readathon to an end. I've certainly had a really, really fun day trying to be a little bit more like Rory, and I definitely feel like I've tapped into my inner Rory because this has been a day filled with ambition, filled with lots of reading, great food, great TV, watching Gilmore Girls, and also lots and lots of coffee. So I'm definitely going to be continuing on with trying to tick more books off the Rory Gilmore list, starting with the rest of The Time Traveller's Wife. But for now, I really, really just need a cup of tea because I stuck to my inner Gilmore and just drank coffee for the last 24 hours, but now I just want a cup of tea. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.